Dun dun dun, the crisis of the Union. So there's a few things I wanted to make sure that we spent a little bit of time talking about. And if you're looking for the video of my face, you're not going to get it this time. My camera is elsewhere. But the visuals on the slides that you're going to see are going to be very helpful for you in understanding a few different parts and aspects of the 1850s leading to the Civil War that are specifically related to those factors, those causes, the connections that we've addressed in class, the things that we've seen in our video, The Abolitionists, but also the things that may need a little bit more time to see how they connect. Okay, so this first one is going to look at kind of before and after the Compromise of 1850, starting right at the beginning. And in the next couple of videos, I want to try and keep us chronological, right, to keep things in order. The video series we're watching, The Abolitionists, does a good job of keeping things in chronological order, but sometimes because of that we miss those connections. And so I'm going to compromise chronology. I'm going to compromise a timeline for the sake of connections. Okay, so ultimately we'll get to the point of seeing how all these things just lead to that last tipping point in the election of 1860. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is personal liberty laws. This is something that was mentioned in the video. I spent a little bit of time pointing it out the other day, and what we have to recognize is the power of these personal liberty laws. See, in 1793, of course. All right, so sorry about the interruption. I had a phone call. So 1783 is when Fugitive Slave Laws began being created. And so they go back a long way. And these are the laws that make it clear that Southerners are guaranteed the rights to their escaped property. And so this created at the federal level, because these are passed by Congress, created at the federal level a process for if you had an escaped slave, you could commission someone to go to the north to catch that slave, and what are the circumstances under which that slave needs to be returned back to the south to the owner. So those are old school stuff, and these fugitive slave laws are enforced. Okay, now by the 1740s, what we see is that starting with Massachusetts, most northern states protected individuals from being required to assist in capturing fugitives. This is a big deal. Specifically, if you are a state official, right? If you are a state-employed law enforcement official, they can't be used in the assist of capturing a runaway slave. Oops, back. Also, what this does is this makes it clear that you can't be forced to assist. Now, what this results in is kind of an empowering effect, right? And so slave catchers were sometimes driven away. And one of the best stories of this actually is a close one. A guy named Adam Crosswhite, who you see here, a slave in Kentucky. He and his family escape. They run away to the north, and they settle themselves in Marshall, Michigan. And the idea that we get from the documents is that the man who was responsible for his escape, a member of the Underground Railroad, True and True, was resided there and led him there because Marshall was an anti-slavery community. And Marshall, Michigan, is where Adam Crosswhite and his family reside. And over time, a man named Francis Troutman, who is the grandson of the owner of the Crosswhite family, is commissioned to the north to try and capture the slave. And so Francis Troutman is the man who goes and he tries to hunt them down, and he sets himself in Marshall, which is where he finds out that this family was sent to or is residing in, or he's believed to be in. And so using some acts of deception, he figures out that this is where the family is, and before Troutman can procure the Crosswhite family, the townspeople of Marshall brandishing swords, knives, guns. I mean, the 100 people gathered together to protect Adam Crosswhite and drive Francis Troutman and Troutman's grandfather, who arrives to secure his slaves. They drive him out of town, and Adam Crosswhite and his family flee to Canada for the time until after the Civil War, and then they return back to Marshall once it's all finished. So this is kind of a neat empowerment. Now, actions like this, these things infuriate Southerners, specifically people from Kentucky and other Southern slave states, because they seem to violate those fugitive slave laws. Now, it's these things and the actions of people in Marshall that leads to a beefed up fugitive slave law. So in the Compromise of 1850, we see there are a number of things that are included, that are involved in that, and admitting California as a free state is a big one. That was the reason for the compromise, or the need, but it's a stronger fugitive slave law we see is one of the biggest things. And as a result of this fugitive slave law, the media kind of gets behind it. When I say media, I'm referring really to the newspapers. They get behind it, and they attack the abolitionists and the anti-slavery advocates in the North as being responsible for tearing the nation apart in a way. Now there are other parts of this, popular sovereignty and the Mexican Cession. This territory here on the screen. This gets the Utah territory, the New Mexico territory specifically, be open up to slavery, and then this little strip of land here gets taken care of. But that's all part of this fugitive slave law, or this Compromise of 1850. But this is the big part, okay? And I want to spend a little bit of time just connecting the previous personal liberty laws with the new fugitive slave law, and being response to those, and then seeing how they connect to a new set of personal liberty laws, something that hasn't been talked about or discussed. Right, so this compromise allows for this crisis to be averted. That was seemingly tearing the nation apart. Right, admitting California as a free state wasn't a guarantee thing, although it should have been admitted as a free state. And so it was supposed to be the final compromise between the sections, but as we're going to see, it wasn't the compromise that Henry Clay wanted to be the last. It was the final compromise, but it wasn't the final compromise that Clay intended. Right? There are no more compromises after this. So in 1852, just 2 years after this compromise and these sets of laws come through that settle things for a while. And really, it's a huge benefit to the Southern states. Harriet Beecher Stowe writes her penultimate work. Her life's work goes into this book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And as we read in the textbook, it's a series of stories, all related to the same plantation, same owner, and all related to kind of revolving around this humble, meek, kind-hearted slave named Uncle Tom. This is a very popular book, an immense bestseller, and these characters are not only read about, but it's adapted to a theatrical version of it, and its popularity actually increases resistance to this new fugitive slave law that came in 1850. And as a result, people are empowered by the accounts of Eliza, running away, and the slaves, the slave catchers, and their dogs chasing her down and making her choose, freezing to death through the Ohio River to save her son, or staying and being eaten by the dogs. That's the idea there. And the accounts of this maniacal and mean Simon Legree, killing and attacking Uncle Tom, beating him to death. Right? These things make people, these tip people over the edge. Those who were, so-so to slavery are now very against it. And the accounts there lead to a new set of personal liberty laws that are passed by Michigan and other northern states. Now, if you remember the Fugitive Slave Law that came in 1950 or 1850, made it possible for kidnapping to be legal. It's one thing to capture a runaway slave that you can prove is a slave, but it's another thing to capture someone who kind of meets the description of someone you think could be a slave, and to essentially steal them for the purposes of making them a slave, even though they were and have been, a free person living in the North, documented for however long. So with these personal liberty laws, they don't necessarily help fugitive slaves per se. But what they do is make it impossible for someone to come to the North and kidnap and steal someone who is free, and sell them into slavery. And so by guaranteeing habeas corpus means that you can't be locked up, means that you can't be put in jail. If you're a black person and you're accused of being a slave, you can't be placed in jail until someone comes to take you out, right? Habeas corpus is the Latin phrase for meaning that you have to know what you're in jail for. And this also guarantees jury trials for accused slaves. So, if someone comes up and says that so and so, this black man here is my slave, he can't just take him. This slave is entitled to a jury trial, and that's a huge thing. It guarantees them rights of citizenship, even though they're not quite full citizens. It requires clear proof in court of the status of a suspected runaway. Now, there's all other parts of this. This is in Michigan, anyways. There were two laws that kind of worked in tandem, and they both worked to not only make it difficult for someone to steal someone who was previously free into slavery, but it also punished people who wrongfully and deceitfully try and steal people, right? So every person who shall wrongfully and maliciously seize or procure to be seized any free person entitled to freedom, with intent to have such person held in slavery, shall pay a fine of not less than $500, no more than $1,000, and be imprisoned 5 years in the state prison. So if you are intending to come and steal a person, if you are a true kidnapper, right? These state laws have the effect of punishing you for that status. And these don't go so far as to nullify the Fugitive Slave Law, but they give it the teeth and the meaning that the federal law doesn't. And so these state laws go above and beyond what the federal law didn't do. So it's kind of like it is nullified, but not fully nullified. And that gets us into the presidential election of 1852, and I'm going to talk about that at a different time. So while this slide is up on the screen, you can kind of take a look at it and study it and understand what's coming. But I'm going to talk about the presidential elections in the next one.